The alien commander stepped down from the silver-plated ramp of his cruiser with the heavy stride of one who had fought in wars that scarred the edges of galaxies. His armor glowed faintly under the Earth's sun, polished and regal, a reminder of his long service and the countless medals he had earned across decades of conflict. He had faced insectoid swarms that devoured moons and mechanical empires that consumed stars, yet none of them had broken his calm, stoic demeanor. He carried himself with the certainty of an officer who believed he had seen every form of cruelty and every style of discipline that sentient beings could create. When the council had chosen him for this mission, he accepted with quiet amusement. The humans were still considered young as a species. They had not yet traveled beyond their small system, and yet their reputation had spread through intercepted signals and scattered reports of wars fought with ferocity far beyond their scale. The commander had laughed at the idea that such a primitive people could teach the galaxy anything of value. His kind built armies with precision, their soldiers trained in artificial environments, perfected by centuries of science and strategy. What could a race of flesh and chaos possibly show him? His shuttle touched down on the Academy grounds, and the air was filled with a strange mix of scents, metallic oil smoke, and something else raw and organic that unsettled his senses. The moment the ramp lowered, he heard it, a deafening roar, not from engines but from human throats, hundreds of them chanting in unison, with a rhythm that shook the ground as if the very soil bent to their will. The commander narrowed his eyes, his mandibles twitching in confusion. These were not the sounds of ceremony or order, but the sounds of creatures building a storm. A human officer approached, his posture sharp, his eyes blazing with authority. He spoke words the translator rendered simply, "Welcome, Commander. You will now see the heart of our warriors. Follow me." The alien expected a formal tour, perhaps clean barracks, tidy formations, and quiet demonstrations. Instead, what he saw nearly froze him in place, for stretching across the grounds were lines of recruits crawling through mud, their bodies battered by rain and dirt, while their instructors screamed at them not with words of guidance but with sheer force of will, each shout cutting into the air like a blade. The commander tilted his head, wondering why they allowed themselves to be humiliated, and yet none of the humans stopped, none of them resisted. Every single one pushed forward, dragging broken knees through gravel and filth, their faces twisted with effort, yet their eyes blazing with something he could not name. He had seen soldiers driven by fear, he had seen armies driven by duty, but this was something else entirely. This was hunger. He followed the officer deeper into the chaos, and each step chipped away at his certainty. The ground trembled with explosions from training drills, the air reeked of sweat and fire. The humans sprinted, climbed, fought, and shouted in unison. A living storm that obeyed not because of fear of punishment but because they seemed to thrive in this furnace of suffering. Alien commander straightened his back, trying to maintain the composure expected of him, but already a whisper stirred in his mind that perhaps this mission would shake him in ways no war ever had. At the gates of the human military academy, the alien commander expected polite order and refined procedure. His experience with countless academies across the stars had always been the same: precise formations, shining halls, spotless uniforms, and drills carried out with mathematical elegance. But what greeted him on Earth shattered every expectation. For the moment he crossed the threshold, he was met not by silence or ceremony but by a violent surge of noise. Explosions echoed from the training grounds, and the sharp cracks of gunfire split the air, so sudden and constant that he instinctively raised his gun. The humans were everywhere, running at full speed across fields, leaping over barriers, smashing their bodies through wooden frames. Their boots thundered against the ground like war drums, and the commander could feel the tremor through his armor. Smoke trailed upward from distant exercises, and the acrid scent of burning fuel mixed with the earthy stench of mud. It was chaos, alive chaos, and yet there was an unmistakable pattern woven into it, like a storm that seemed wild, but followed laws beyond the eyes of outsiders. The officer guiding him walked with calm assurance, as if the uproar was nothing more than background music. His voice cut through the bedlam, telling the commander to observe carefully, for this was the truest form of the human warrior spirit. The alien narrowed his gaze, his thoughts churning. Why would recruits be treated with such brutality? Why would an academy that claimed to forge soldiers and discipline embrace such reckless disorder? He had seen cadets in his own empire spend years perfecting their stance before ever lifting a weapon, and here humans flung themselves into fire before their first day was done. A line of recruits dashed past him, faces streaked with dirt, uniforms torn, bodies glistening with sweat. They moved with ragged gasps, but their eyes were alive. Not with fear, not with despair, but with something closer to exhilaration. The commander felt an unease curl through his chest as he saw them push themselves far beyond endurance muscles. Straining bones, aching, yet no one stopped, no one begged for release. Every shout from an instructor only pushed them faster and harder, as though pain itself was fuel. He paused when one recruit stumbled, collapsing into the mud, with trembling arms for a moment. The commander expected the others to leave the weak behind, but instead two recruits seized their comrade, pulling him forward, dragging him along until his legs moved again. The instructors did not slow the exercise for them. They screamed louder, their voices booming like thunder, and the fallen recruit rose, shaking, teeth clenched, and eyes burning with fury. Rather than shame, the alien commander could not name the force that bound them together. It was not simple obedience, it was not the rigid chain of command that he knew. It was something fierce and invisible. A fire that demanded they rise again, no matter the cost. He realized then that this academy was not merely training soldiers, it was awakening predators. He adjusted the grip on his ceremonial staff as if to anchor himself, but already the ground beneath him felt different, as though he were standing on the edge of a storm that threatened to break free from Earth and consume the stars. He watched in disbelief as the humans leaped from towering platforms into deep pits, filled with mud and water, their bodies crashing with a force that would have broken the bones of most species. Yet they rose quickly, covered in filth, and ran forward, as if the pain meant nothing. The alien commander felt his jaw tighten, his mandibles twitching nervously. He had toured countless academies on countless worlds, but never once had he seen recruits hurl themselves into punishment willingly. It was madness, and yet there was a strange unity in their madness. The instructors barked commands at volumes that rattled the very air, veins bulging from their necks, voices slicing through the chaos like jagged blades. There was no softness, no comfort. Every word was an assault, and the alien thought surely the recruits would break under such noise, surely their minds would fracture, but instead their backs straightened and their strides grew longer, as though the screaming did not destroy them, but forged them. With every syllable, he saw recruits sprint into rooms filled with smoke, unable to see more than a step ahead. Yet they charged forward, guided only by instinct and the shouted words of their comrades. Some stumbled, coughing, but hands pulled them forward again and again, never allowing weakness to linger. The commander realized with cold clarity that here, weakness was not erased through exile or death, as in other armies. It was burned away through fire until only iron remained. Group hurled themselves against walls, climbing ropes, tearing their hands, bloody yet not letting go. The alien flinched as he saw raw flesh rip open, but the humans did not stop. He whispered to himself in disbelief, wondering how they could treat their young like this. And yet those same recruits shouted triumph as they reached the top, their faces streaked with both pain and pride. He noticed another detail that disturbed him even more. Whenever a recruit failed an obstacle, the punishment was never rest. It was more struggle, more push-ups, more sprints, more crawling through gravel, until their muscles trembled and their breaths came in ragged gasps. But the moment they finished, they returned to the obstacle and attacked it again, as though defeat was not an end but a demand for greater effort. The alien had seen soldiers punished with exile, disgrace, or discharge, but never had he seen failure turned into a ritual of strength. The human officer beside him smiled slightly at the commander's expressionless face and said quietly, "This is only their first week." The alien almost stumbled at the words "first week." He repeated in his mind. He felt something cold spreading through his chest, a realization that these were not yet soldiers. These were still recruits, still unshaped, raw and unfinished, and yet already they endured more than seasoned veterans of his own empires. The sun burned overhead and the chants of the humans rose like thunder. The alien commander could feel his confidence crumbling piece by piece, his certainty dissolving like smoke. He tried to remind himself that he was only an observer. But in truth, every moment he spent within this academy felt less like a tour and more like a judgment upon his own people. The alien commander noted how failure was met not with comfort, but with harsher trials, and he could not comprehend why the humans endured it without protest. In his empire, soldiers were chosen from birth, bred in laboratories, and perfected through decades of calculated instruction. Their errors were corrected by machines, their pain numbed by medication, their victories celebrated with ceremony. Yet here on Earth, every mistake was met with more strain, more exhaustion, more fire, and instead of despair, the recruits grew fiercer with every punishment. He watched one recruit collapse during a drill, face buried in mud, chest heaving with exhaustion. The alien expected the human to be dismissed as unworthy, but instead the instructor knelt beside the broken soldier and roared into his ear to rise or be left behind. The recruit screamed with rage and dragged himself upward, trembling, every muscle on fire. Yet refusing to stay down, the others cheered not with kindness but with a primal energy that lifted him back into motion. The alien felt a strange chill, for he saw, not pity in their eyes but something sharper, something that bound them through suffering. The commander thought of his own warriors, bred in sterile chambers, trained with holograms and simulations. They moved with elegance, they obeyed without question, they were flawless in design, but they did not bleed in training. They did not crawl through filth, they did not roar with fury when struck down, they simply followed orders like precision tools. He began to wonder if such tools could ever withstand the storm that was humanity. Officer guiding him pointed to another section of the grounds where recruits dragged massive tires across dirt, their bodies bent with strain, their faces red with effort, each step a battle against gravity and fatigue. Yet no one quit, even as legs shook and hands bled. The alien clenched his staff tighter, his mind struggling to accept that this chaos was training, this suffering was strength. He whispered to himself that this was barbarism, yet a deeper voice whispered that it was genius. The drills continued. He noticed something else that disturbed him further. The instructors never spoke of survival or mere victory. They shouted about domination, about breaking limits, about becoming something greater than flesh. The words struck the commander as dangerous, and yet he could not deny the effect, for every recruit responded with eyes alight, as though they believed that through torment they could transcend themselves. The alien commander stood in silence, feeling the weight of realization pressing upon him. His people had always assumed superiority, believing their soldiers were unmatched, their strategies flawless. Yet standing here among mud and smoke and human fury, he began to feel a doubt that unsettled the core of his being. For if recruits endured such trials as mere preparation, what monsters would they become when fully trained? The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the grounds, the chants of humans echoing across the field like war drums. The alien commander exhaled slowly, but the breath shook in his chest, his composure cracking as he admitted silently that he had never truly understood what it meant to forge a soldier until now. His mind spun when he saw young humans disassemble and reassemble weapons, blindfolded, their fingers moving with impossible speed. Every piece clicked apart and returned into place with the rhythm of instinct rather than calculation. The alien commander leaned forward, eyes narrowing, as he tried to understand how creatures so young, so raw, could perform with such precision under such pressure. His people had machines to teach such skills, machines that guided the hand with flawless accuracy, and yet here these humans learned, through repetition, through error, through pain, until their hands obeyed without thought. The commander moved closer and studied the faces of the recruits. As they worked, their brows were furrowed, their jaws clenched. Sweat poured down their temples, yet their focus never wavered. Every click of metal echoed like a heartbeat, every motion carried urgency, as if failure was not an option, as if the very breath of survival depended on their mastery. He felt a strange weight in his chest, for he realized these recruits were not simply learning a skill, they were forging instinct so deep that it would live within their bones. One instructor strode between the rows of recruits, shouting times and challenges: faster, faster again, no mistakes, and the recruits obeyed with a kind of feral intensity. One fumbled, dropping a pin into the dirt, and before the commander could even blink, the instructor had knocked the weapon aside and demanded 10 push-ups in the mud. The recruit complied instantly, not a word of complaint leaving his lips. When he returned, he assembled the weapon faster than before, his hands trembling but his speed unmatched. The alien commander swallowed hard, for he could feel the raw energy of desperation turned into mastery. He thought of his own soldiers, raised in the clean silence of orbital academies, surrounded by holographic tutors, their hands guided by perfect models and flawless diagrams. They achieved precision, yes, but not like this, not born of error, not born of dirt and sweat and punishment. He began to see that the human way was not about avoiding mistakes, but about breaking through them, until mistakes could no longer exist within the body. The officer guiding him asked if he was impressed, but the commander did not answer. His thoughts were spiraling too quickly. He was beginning to understand that human training was not about skill alone, it was about transformation, about turning fragile flesh into unyielding instinct. He could see it in their faces, the pride when a weapon snapped together, the fury when an instructor demanded more, the joy when they succeeded despite the weight of exhaustion around him. The recruits finished the drill and held their weapons high, shouting in unison, a sound so loud it rattled the ground. The commander flinched at the sheer force of their voices, for it was not the sound of discipline alone, it was the roar of creatures who believed they had earned their strength through fire and suffering, and he realized with dread that this belief made them more dangerous than any machine or simulation ever could have. He turned away. He felt his hands trembling on his staff, and for the first time in decades the alien commander wondered if his own armies were not the strongest force in the galaxy but only the most sheltered. He trembled as the recruits fought each other bare-handed with eyes blazing as if combat was not duty but hunger. The alien commander had seen soldiers spar countless times across countless academies, but never had he seen anything like this. There was no formality here, no ceremonial strikes, no calculated choreography. It was raw, it was primal, it was as if the humans had stripped away every layer of civility and revealed the predator that still lurked within their flesh. The arena floor was stained with dirt and sweat and sometimes blood. The recruits were paired off, thrown into the ring with no weapon but their own bodies and a voice, shouting to fight harder, faster, stronger. The alien leaned forward, his mandibles twitching as one recruit was slammed into the ground, his chest heaving, his lips split. Yet before he could even breathe, the instructor barked, "Rise," and the boy did rise. Fists clenched, eyes burning with renewed fury, he charged again, not caring that his body screamed for rest. The commander remembered the way his own kind trained in combat simulations. Precise movements, measured strikes, every motion crafted to conserve energy and avoid risk. But here risk was everything. The humans embraced it, they fed on it. Every mistake became a lesson carved into their bones, every bruise a memory etched into their flesh. They were not taught to avoid pain. They were taught to absorb it, to become stronger through it, until nothing could break them. One pair fought with such violence that the alien almost stepped back in alarm, fists colliding with jaws, knees striking ribs, each blow louder than the last. He expected the fight to be stopped, but the instructors only shouted louder, urging them on as if the violence itself was the point. At last one recruit fell gasping, covered in blood, but instead of pity, the others cheered for him and lifted him up as though defeat was not shame but honor. The commander could not comprehend it, for in his world defeat meant weakness, and weakness meant dismissal. Yet here it was, celebrated as part of growth. He noticed the eyes of the recruits as they fought. They did not show fear. They did not show doubt. They shone with something he had only seen in the most desperate battles across the stars. It was the will to survive at any cost. But here it was cultivated not by war itself, but by training. He shuddered, for he realized these humans were not just preparing to fight, they were preparing to thrive in the very chaos that broke other species. The officer guiding him spoke quietly and said, "This is how we forge warriors who will never surrender." The commander did not answer. He could only stare at the bloodied recruits, smiling despite their pain, fists raised high as if victory was not winning but simply enduring. He turned his gaze away, but the sounds of fists striking flesh and voices roaring with hunger followed him like echoes inside his mind, and he began to fear that the true weapon of humanity was not their machines or their tactics, but the savage will that no galaxy could extinguish. The commander realized that these humans thrived not in peace but in struggle, and every ounce of suffering only made them sharper. He had lived long enough to see empires collapse. When luxury softened their armies, he had watched generals fall, when their troops no longer knew hardship, and now he understood that humanity had avoided this fate, not by chance, but by design. Their academies were built as crucibles where comfort was stripped away, where weakness was burned out until nothing remained but iron. He thought of his own homeworld, where soldiers lived in clean quarters, their food measured with precision, their exercises monitored by machines that prevented harm. His people had believed that protecting their warriors from pain made them stronger, yet now he saw the flaw. Pain was not the enemy, pain was the teacher, and humanity embraced it like an old companion. They trained in mud and fire and exhaustion, because they knew the universe itself was cruel, and they refused to meet it unprepared. The alien commander felt a weight settle in his chest as he remembered his legions standing in perfect lines, their armor shining, their weapons flawless. They looked powerful, yet he wondered now if they were brittle, polished glass that would shatter at the first true storm. He could not shake the image of the recruits. He had seen faces streaked with mud, bodies trembling with exhaustion, yet eyes burning with determination that could not be manufactured by machine. He walked further through the academy grounds. He saw new drills that confirmed his fear. Recruits were deprived of sleep, yet forced to run Through obstacle courses, recruits were drenched in freezing water, then ordered to lift weights heavier than their BAFTAs. Recruits were screamed at, insulted, broken down, only to rise again, stronger than before. The commander whispered to himself that this was cruelty, yet another voice within him said it was brilliance. He paused to watch a group dragging heavy packs across rocky terrain, their knees shaking under the weights, some collapsing only to be forced back on their feet again. The sight stirred something uneasy inside him, for he had always believed discipline was taught through fear of punishment or promise of reward. But these humans carried their burden because they refused to let each other fall. They pushed not only for themselves but for their comrades. The bond of shared struggle bound them tighter than chains. The officer guiding him smiled faintly and said, "They will march like this for days, without rest, when the war demands it." The commander turned his eyes away, unable to reply, for he knew his soldiers would falter after a single day without comfort. He felt shame gnawing at him, shame that his people had chosen the easier path, the path of safety rather than the path of strength. The chants of the recruits rose again, filling the air like thunder, the sound of voices that had learned to sing through suffering. The alien commander stood silently, his hands tightening on his staff as he admitted to himself that humanity had discovered the secret that every empire feared. Strength was not born in peace. It was born in pain. When the tour ended, the commander returned to his ship, shaken, silent, and deeply disturbed. He had entered the academy with the calm pride of one who believed his knowledge of war was absolute, but he left with his thoughts fractured, his steps uncertain, and his heart pounding with a fear he had not felt in centuries. As the shuttle doors closed behind him, he finally allowed his composure to crack. His hands trembled against the cold surface of his staff, and his breathing came sharp and uneven. The human officer had bid him farewell with nothing more than a nod, as if the horrors he had witnessed were ordinary, as if the chaos, the mud, the blood, and the roaring chants were simply routine. The commander could not comprehend how humanity treated such brutality as normal life. He sank into his seat, staring out the viewport at the academy grounds shrinking in the distance, and he felt as though he was fleeing, not leaving. His mind replayed every moment he had seen the recruits crawling through mud, their bodies shredded, yet their spirits unbroken, the blindfolded soldiers building weapons with hands that never faltered, the brutal fights that ended not in hatred but in unity, the endless chants that rose from exhausted throats like the battle cries of predators. Each memory stabbed into him like shards of glass, and he realized he could never unsee them. For the first time in his long career, he questioned the foundation of his own armies. Were they strong because of their order, or were they weak because of their comfort? He thought of sterile training chambers, polished and pristine, where mistakes were corrected by machines before they could scar the mind. He thought of soldiers raised in perfect conditions, never tasting hunger, never bleeding in the dirt, never fearing the roar of an instructor. He wondered if they would shatter in the furnace that shaped humans. The shuttle lifted into the sky, and the commander closed his eyes, yet the echoes of human voices followed him into the silence, chanting louder and louder until he felt as though they would tear through the walls of his mind. He clutched at his chest, whispering to himself that it was only training, yet he knew deep down that it was more than training. It was transformation, and no empire had ever created soldiers like this. The stars unfolded before him as the shuttle broke through the atmosphere. But the beauty of space offered no comfort. He felt small in a way he had never felt before, small and fragile against the storm he had just witnessed. His thoughts spiraled into dark visions of human armies unleashed across the galaxy, not polished legions marching in silence, but swarms of predators screaming through the mud, of alien worlds, unstoppable, unbreakable, relentless. He gripped his staff tighter as though clinging to the last remnant of his pride. But his pride had already cracked. The truth had settled into his bones like ice. He was afraid of them. He was afraid of humanity, and that fear would not leave him. When the council asked for his report, he could only say that humans were the most dangerous species he had ever seen. The chamber was vast, filled with the luminous faces of elders who had led the empire for centuries. Their eyes burned with expectation as they awaited the commander to deliver his findings. They believed this mission would confirm their superiority. They believed the humans were crude primitives who could be dismissed as irrelevant. But the commander stood before them, trembling, his armor heavy, his voice quiet, his spirit unsettled. He began to speak slowly, describing the chaos of the academy, the endless shouting, the mud, the exhaustion, the drills that seemed designed to break bodies and minds yet somehow created unyielding warriors. He told of recruits who bled and smiled, of recruits who collapsed and rose again, of recruits who fought one another with savage fury yet left the ring with brotherhood instead of hatred. His words faltered often, for the memories were sharp and relentless, cutting into his composure like blades. The council murmured in disbelief. Some laughed softly, dismissing his words as exaggeration. Others leaned forward, intrigued by the tremor in his voice. One elder demanded to know how a primitive species with no interstellar fleet could be considered dangerous. The commander raised his gaze, slowly, mandibles twitching, and replied that fleets and weapons were meaningless without soldiers who could endure that humanity had created. Soldiers who did not fear suffering, soldiers who did not fear failure, soldiers who did not fear death. His words echoed through the chamber, and silence followed, for the council could sense his sincerity. They had known this commander for decades. He had never shown fear, he had never hesitated in war, and now he stood before them, shaken, broken, almost pleading. They could not dismiss him so easily. He told them that the humans had built an army, not of machines, not of technology, but of willpower, and that willpower was a weapon greater than any fleet. He described the chants that had shaken his core, the voices of recruits crying out together like thunder. He told them how every punishment turned into fuel, how every weakness became strength, how every recruit was reborn through pain. He confessed that his own legions, though beautiful, though flawless, though efficient, were hollow compared to the storm he had seen in human eyes. He told them that humanity was not simply training soldiers. They were awakening predators. The elders whispered among themselves, some fearful, some defiant, some refusing to accept the warning, but the commander only lowered his head and repeated that humans were the most dangerous species he had ever seen, for they had embraced the truth. His people had forgotten that peace does not create strength, that comfort does not forge endurance, that only through fire can iron be shaped. When he finished, the chamber remained silent, the weight of his words sinking into every corner. The alien commander felt the eyes of the council upon him, but he no longer cared for their judgment. He had spoken the truth, and the truth was that humanity was coming.